Welcome to Metro Talk. My name is Tim Albright for the Vacationing Kent Shuffle. With us this week is Pat Gowan from the Post-Dispatch. Hello, Pat.
Hi, Tim.
And also Jim Schrader, the publisher of the Telegraph. How are you?
For the non-vacationing.
For the non-vacationing, well, you know,
Telegraph,
we have to work for a living.
Yes,
you know.
that's right. We're not vice presidents.
No, nowhere near vice presidents.
Some of us are publishers.
Well, that's
And
true.
who is not vacationing?
Jim, Representative Dwight Kay says a Democratic plan that would shift the cost of pension benefits to local school districts would cost the districts an additional 6 to 9% additionally every year. Kay said that 6%, the low end, would cost both Alton and Bethalto around $2 million a year. Bethalto and Roxana would be about $600,000 a year. Should we be concerned about Kay's warning, or is he just politicking here? Is this just election year rhetoric?
Well, some of it is election year rhetoric, but he's right. We've talked about this many times before on this show. There is a move in Springfield to move the pension benefits for teachers from the state, which is supposed to fund it now and is underfunding it, back to the local school districts, which, as you point out, for Edwardsville and Alton could be as much as $2 million per year. For smaller districts, $600,000, $800,000 per year. And there's been no discussion of the state rebating back the portion of taxes that we pay into the state for education back to the local school districts. So let's just use a number. Let's say I pay $10,000 a year in taxes to the state of Illinois to fund education, to fund schools. A portion of my $10,000 a year is supposed to fund teachers' retirement. Now they say, okay, we want to shift that burden for those pension plans to, I happen to live in Bethalto, to the Bethalto School District. Well, now they need another $600,000 in operating money in the Bethalto School District locally because they've shifted the burden from the state back. Then that means my local taxes that I pay into Bethalto are going to have to go up some amount divided by the total households in Bethalto to fund an additional $600,000 per year. Edwardsville, $2 million. Alton, $2 million. Because the state is not saying we're going to shift the burden back to Bethalto and we'll rebate them back $600,000. There's been no discussion of that. The state is trying to lessen their burden for funding pensions so that they can spend the money somewhere else that they have a deficit, which is in virtually everything the state does. So it is something that Dwight Kay and the others have a legitimate concern about. A certain amount of it is political rhetoric because joining him on the panel was Madison County Treasurer Kurt Prenzler and a couple of people from the Madison County Board, and I think Jeremy Plank, who happens to be running for auditor. So it was a Republican gathering for this news conference, but their concern is legitimate. If the burden of funding those teacher pensions is moved back to the local school districts and the cash doesn't come back from Springfield, it's an additional burden on those school districts. Therefore, it's an additional burden on the local taxpayers.
Yeah. Pat, is this something that we should be concerned about, or is this just rhetoric, screaming about taxes?
Well, absolutely be concerned about it. It's real. I did a column a while back pointing out that I think the average liability per school district in Illinois would be about $1 million. More for larger districts, less for smaller districts, and Representative Kay's numbers seem to comport pretty well with what I was guessing back in the day. At this point, for a teacher's pension right now, a teacher puts in 9.4% of his or her pay. The school district puts in just enough to make it almost 10% altogether, and then they send a bill to the rest for the state. The state funds the teacher pensions for downstate teachers, downstate being everything but Chicago. Chicago has its own pool, its own pension system. How it ever got to be this way, I don't know, except it goes back into the 1930s, and it's been that way for a long, long time. State was allowed to raid the pension fund, to underfund the pension fund. Now the pension fund's in trouble. What the state proposes is we will pay off the backlog. $83 billion for all state pensions, including teachers. We'll pay the backlog. We want the school districts to begin paying from this point forward the liabilities for everybody on the payroll. And the guess is that that's going to be, depending upon who you listen to, somewhere from 3.7% of the entire school budget to maybe 6 or 9% of the school budget. And I don't know how to answer how it gets calculated in the middle there. Virtually every other public employee's pension is paid at the local level. The state doesn't pay for the Alton firefighters' pension or the Belleville police pension or anything like that. The communities have their own pension funds. This would align that with this. There is logic in this. The problem with the logic is it comes at a time when everybody's hurting and when the state is already stiffing the school districts on the school aid. So the school districts are getting a double whammy. First, they're not getting the school aid they're supposed to get from the state, at least not on time, and they don't know when they're going to get their payments. The second part is now the state wants to shift the pension on top of that, so a school district already with its back against the wall financially would almost certainly have to raise property tax to come up with the share of the pension. Now, there was talk at some point from Governor Quinn about making the state aid payments to schools more reliable if the schools were to take on the pension requirements. So in a way, if you're getting stiffed now and you got to figure out how to live without the state money, if you take over the pensions and the state spigot comes back on again, then you might be about where you are now if you're running a school district, and the impact might not be that great. There's also talk about ramping it in gradually, not putting it all in the districts at once, but maybe they would pay a sixth the first year and a third the next year, that sort of thing. So that could be too. On the other hand, once they have the pension, once the school districts are funding the pension, if the state then shuts off the school aid again because things continue to get tight in Springfield, then it's a double whammy on the school district. But I think by and large this is going to happen after the election. I think it will pass, I think it will be signed, and I think it will cause property tax increases in a number of school districts.
And remember, those property tax increases at the local school districts have to be voted on. So if the voters turn down an additional levy for the schools, just because the operating expenses went up due to a mandate by the state, then that means somewhere between 3.7 and 6.9% of the operating budget of those local school districts will have to be cut in services so that they can pay into the pension.
On top of the cuts already made, what the bottom line of this is the kids, maybe the future generations, may be in real trouble over this.
All right, on that happy note, we're going to take a break and be right back.
Hi, I'm Audrey Lucchese, and I'm from Alton, Illinois. I love music, and that's why I came to Lewis & Clark. It's been an amazing experience here at Lewis & Clark, working with students that are so talented, coming from all over the area, and they work so hard to follow their dreams. The music faculty at Lewis & Clark they're fantastic, and they're there every step of the way to push you to follow your dreams. One of the unique opportunities that I have had at Lewis & Clark is being able to record my own music with a fellow student here. Being able to record our music has opened doors for us in the music industry. My long-term goal is to finish here at Lewis & Clark and then to transfer to a four-year school and finish my degree in music performance. I would recommend Lewis & Clark to another student because it is definitely a great place to get started and it can open so many doors for you.
Big dreams and good grades aren't enough to get into college. There are actual steps you need to take. Finding someone who can help is the first and most important. For the next steps, go to knowhowtogo.org.
Doc. Jim Schrader and Pat Gowan are here with us this week. Pat, the Census Bureau says that income in both Illinois and Missouri fell by 3% last year. The Bureau says that some job opportunities have opened up, but they don't necessarily pay as well as the ones that we've already lost. Is Illinois and Missouri destined to be a lower tiered job market?
I think everybody may be destined to be a lower tier job market. The disappearance of the middle class is a real thing. I went back and looked at employment figures from the Great Depression because that's the only real benchmark we've got like this. At the beginning of the Great Depression in the U.S., by 1933, I believe the unemployment rate, in 1930, the unemployment rate was estimated to be 5%. They didn't calculate it quite the same way, but it was estimated to be 5%. By 1933, it was 25%. That's how bad it had gotten in 3 years. But at the start of World War II, it was still 15%. So 11 years later, we were still trying to dig out of the employment hole. And of course, earnings are tied to the demand for work. And so the higher the unemployment, the less anything theoretically is worth by way of employment. So what I'm suggesting is if the Great Depression lasted at least 11 years and probably would have gone longer had we not revved up the engine of war, which employed, the unemployment fell to the floor when the war ramped up. If we hadn't had that, I don't know how long the Great Recession would have had a lingering employment effect. So we've got a long way to go with the recession that we are in or have been in. I guess the recession's over by definition, but the recovery's taking forever. And I think that has a direct impact on these jobs. One of my fears long term is that business and government have learned to get by with a lot less because they've had to. Mm-hmm. And as the economy ramps back up, and I own a business, am I going to put money into a lot more people, or am I going to say, well, I automated this, I'm going to leave this automated, and these people that I kept after I laid off the others, they took on 30% more work, but they're doing it okay. I'm afraid a lot of that was churned out by the recession may never come back, at least not in the industries it was in before. So I think we've got a rocky road ahead of us for a long time. I've said this on the show before, had my economics professor in college been proficient in English, I would know a whole lot more about this than I do. But surmising what I can see, I'm not surprised at this, and I don't think it's good news, and I don't think there's necessarily good news right around the corner, and that's regardless of who gets elected president. I don't think it's going to matter that much to these kind of numbers.
Jim, are we destined to have lower paying jobs in the region?
Well, let's just take a look at this from the 30,000 foot level. Let's just start with Alton. Let us think back to the days when we had 3 refineries operating with full employment, hundreds more than now, Phillips 66 employees there. We had Laclede Steel at one time employing, I think, about 2,500 people. We had the largest glass bottle factory in the world sitting on Broadway. We had Alton Box Board, and all of these jobs paid very good wages. These were the type of jobs that people took out of high school and retired there with generous pensions and health care benefits. Then let's run across the river. Let's talk about St. Louis. Let's talk about Procter & Gamble. Let's talk about Purex. Let's talk about the Chevrolet plant that used to be in South City. Let's talk about the Ford plant that was in North County. Let us talk about 3 Chrysler plants. All of these were excellent paying jobs. Let's talk about American Steel, Granite City Steel, A.O. Smith. Let's talk about all of these manufacturing facilities that were just here in the St. Louis metropolitan area, all who paid very handsome wages for those days. All of those jobs are gone. And we've replaced them with service sector jobs. Even if they're better paying or better compensated service sector jobs like the MasterCard plant or billing plants and Illinois American Water, no, those are still service sector jobs. They pay better than fast food industry, but they are still not to the level of wages adjusted for inflation that the steel mill would have paid, or the bottle factory would have paid, or certainly the UAW would have made in Ford and Chevrolet and Chrysler. All of those things are going to bring down your average income. They just are, especially adjusted for inflation. Certainly in the metropolitan area here, we've become an employment base of service sector jobs. We don't manufacture a lot of things in what was formerly known as the Rust Belt, though some people have a problem with that terminology. It paid people very handsomely to be called Rust Belt in those days. That's all going to bring the incomes down. And that's not just in the St. Louis metropolitan area. That's all over the state of Illinois. That's all over the state of Missouri. And those jobs have moved in many cases to the southeast or southwest, but more cases than not, it's moved overseas. All of those vacancies, or all of those jobs that are left, are not going to pay per capita what those manufacturing jobs did in the heyday.
All right, that'll do us for right now. We'll take a break and be right back after this.
Hello and welcome to the Lewis and Clark Minute. Today we're going to check out the radio broadcasting program in WLCA with Mike Lemons.
Have you ever listened to your favorite radio station or your favorite disc jockey and say, you know, I could do that? Or maybe you're the type of person who says, I could never do something like that. Well, with the help of first-year Mass Comm student John, we're going to show you just how easy it is. Each voice intro starts with talking about the band that just played, and we add a station identifier. Next, you want to offer some information that may be of interest to your audience. And finally, tell the listeners what the next song is, who sings it, followed by another station identifier. John will do one live now.
Silver Sun Pickup Substitution on WLCA. The Big Pink released their debut album called A Brief History of Love. The single is off that album. It's The Big Pink with Dominoes. It's on College Radio's Best 89.9.
This has been your Lewis and Clark Minute.
What's that? I don't know. Something I kind of made. Ooh, what's it do?
What do I do? Well, thanks for asking. I ring my bell and I like to dance. What do I do? Well, thanks for asking.
Ow! Yeah, it still needs a little work.
Anything's possible. Keep thinking. Get started on your own inventions or just play some games at inventnow.org.
Sounds like you could use some Van Gogurt. It's fortified with arch-rich nutrients to improve your math and reading skills. Catch!
Van Gogurt, thanks. So what's the deal with your ear?
Always with the ear, huh?
Feed your kids the arts. For 10 simple ways to learn how, visit AmericansForTheArts.org.
Welcome back to Metro Talk. I'm Tim Albright. With us is Pat Gowan and Jim Schrader. Jim, a new law in the state has gone into effect that allows school districts to issue prescription allergy medicine without having a prescription, which is kind of odd. The law will allow districts to respond to children who have allergic reaction to bee stings and peanuts of sorts. Is this a good idea to give that power to the school districts?
Well, I think in the case of bee stings, when you're talking about an EpiPen, that probably does make sense. What you're basically talking about is if my child's under some type of a prescription medication, we all know a child can't carry it with them anymore. I mean, a child can't even carry aspirin or anything else with them because that's against school policies. So many schools would allow the school nurse or an administrator to administer that medication, but they wanted the prescription to be on file so they could prove that little Johnny or little Susie was not getting something that they weren't prescribed to take, and basically it was going to absolve the school of some type of a legal ramification. In the case of bee stings, a lot of people, unless you've been stung by a bee or a wasp, you don't even know you're allergic to them. But a very simple administered spring-loaded EpiPen which you have to get under a prescription, but could save somebody from going into anaphylactic shock and potentially dying. I think in the case of some of these, it makes sense to do. I understand if it's an ongoing drug that they have to have every day at noon with their meal, that they would want to have some type of prescription backup. That makes sense. But in the case of an emergency where minutes truly could mean life and death for a child who happens to be stung by a bee on the playground or running track, I think that that's no worse than having a defibrillator, or a user-mounted defibrillator to restart a heart. You're talking about potentially saving a child's life, and if you want to run into some legal ramifications that the child lived instead of died because we didn't have a prescription, it seems to make sense to me.
Pat, are we better off now that we have this capability?
I think the defibrillator is a great parallel to this. Now, this law was passed a year ago. The thing that's new is that the schools had no way to get the EpiPens because doctors didn't know how to write a prescription for a school as opposed to a patient. And Attorney General Lisa Madigan put together a system by which doctors could feel some comfort in prescribing them to schools who would then have them on hand. A lot of this has to do, by the way, not just with bee stings, but with food allergies. An estimated 8% of the people have significant food allergies that have shown up or may show up. That would average about 2 students per classroom in a school full of kids. One day, some kid brings a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and the kid on the other side of the room passes out. That's one of the fears for this. So it seems to make perfectly good sense to me. And as a parent, as a grandparent, I certainly would endorse it.
Gentlemen, the Missouri History Museum purchased a 1-acre lot from former Mayor Freeman Bosley for $875,000. And currently the city of St. Louis says that property is worth about $232,000. I didn't take the same economics course as you guys did, but something tells me that was a loss. Pat, should that property have been purchased?
Well, I will now answer in a language that no one... They spent, accounting legal costs and stuff, they spent almost $1 million to buy a lot on which to build a place where they could have sort of a cultural history melding that never came to pass, that they've now decided they can do under the same roof they've got. $1 million later, spent 6 years ago, to, of all people, a mayor who, with his partner, had a barbecue restaurant on the site on Delmar Boulevard that failed. Would like to get out from under the property, and they come along and they spend $1 million for the lot. Joe Edwards, the Blueberry Hill entrepreneur, sort of the king of the Delmar Loop, bought a similar piece of property, I think next door or in close proximity, slightly smaller, for $333,000 after they had spent something like $1 million on this one. The city, I guess, is valuing it for tax purposes at about $250,000, although a real estate broker on the History Museum board says she doesn't believe that ultimately they'll take a loss. She thinks they'll be able to sell it for what they paid for it. I wonder if that's with interest, but beyond that, if that's the case, my own newspaper editorialized about it, suggesting if she's so sure of that she and the head of the History Museum who made the deal ought to just pony up the money and buy the lot back, and then they can enjoy the profit. This thing just does not stand the sniff test at all, but it's one of those things that a combination of a good audit and some aggressive newspaper reporting brought to light.
Yeah.
Well, the smell test really comes in. First of all, you've got a very connected former political leader in Freeman Bosley Sr. They paid $150,000 for the lot that had 2 old houses and a building on it. They tore the 2 houses down, ostensibly to make parking for their barbecue joint, that they also got some tax money to help establish on the Delmar area. The barbecue place went belly up. So, for those of you who don't know what belly up means, that's what a fish does when it dies. It turns belly up. It died. The barbecue place died. So, Dr. Robert Archibald, who's head of the Missouri History Museum, without benefit of having this property valued by an independent real estate appraiser, paid $875,000 for it, another $160,000 or so in legal fees and back taxes, so it's right at $1 million. No benefit of an audit. The city of St. Louis thinks it's somewhere with a value of $230,000 or so. The fly in the ointment here is the tax money that Dr. Archibald used and his board is supported with tax money. That their funding for the Missouri State Historical Society comes from tax revenue generated in the state and the city. So they use tax money to buy a piece of property that is questionable in value, long-term value. It's certainly questionable value in long-term value, for almost 10 times what the investors put into it, with no appraisers, no multiple bids, no anything, just went ahead and shelled out the money. So the taxpayers are on the hook for $1 million piece of property that's now sitting vacant, that the city says, well, there's no way it's worth $1 million. That obviously nobody else thought it was worth $1 million, or Freeman Bosley would have cashed out a long time ago sitting on this vacant property. Dr. Archibald now says, and this is after the reporting in the Post-Dispatch, oops, maybe we should have had this appraised. So, and I thought the Post-Dispatch editorial was great. If it's such a valuable piece of property, let the trustees and Bob Archibald pony up the $1 million, make the taxpayers whole again, and they can put a community center on there, or a barbecue joint, or any other fast food place they want to down on Delmar. That it's not worth $1 million. There's no way, shape, or form that property will probably ever be worth $1 million. But the taxpayers, I don't know that they broke any laws necessarily, but they certainly didn't go through the steps that most tax-supported bodies would have to go through to acquire a piece of property.
All right, gentlemen, real quickly, finally, the Missouri legislature has voted to override Governor Jay Nixon's veto of a bill that would allow employers to opt out of covering contraceptives. Jim, real quickly, should they have done that? Should they have overrode his veto?
This is a political problem that there's going to be no win. Some people, those that feel that their healthcare should provide for contraception by organizations that have religious beliefs against it. It's a no-win situation. The women are always going to think that they should deserve it, and certain legislators are going to say no, they don't.
I think ultimately it'll end up in the courts.
All right. That'll do it for us. Jim Schrader has been with us, the publisher of the Telegraph, and also Pat Gowan from the Post-Dispatch. I'm Tim Albright. We'll see you next time.